AITA for taking back my ring after my fiancée gave me a marriage rulebook? I am 30 years old and in the middle of my medical residency, a stage that is honestly not easy at all. My days start before dawn and often end when the rest of the world is already asleep. Between endless shifts at the hospital in Chicago, complex patients, and decisions that are not taken lightly, the exhaustion is constant. Even so, I always repeated the same thing to myself. All that effort made sense if at the end of the day I could return to something stable, something that gave me peace. I met Madeline almost a year ago in a situation that, being honest, seemed too perfect to be true. It was during a trip. I had managed to get a few days off and decided to use them to break out of my routine. I needed to clear my head. I didn't think too much about the destination. I booked a last-minute package to a resort in Costa Rica. We ended up in the same small tour group for a day trip. She was also traveling alone. Our first conversation was completely casual, with no ulterior motives. We started out complaining about the tour itinerary, which was a bit disorganized, and without realizing it, that chat turned into hours of conversation. The most striking part came later, when we discovered we were both from Chicago. That completely changed the perspective. Suddenly, what seemed like a passing encounter had a real possibility. It was no longer just a travel story, there was something more. Madeline was 28 years old and worked as an interior designer. She had a clear, direct way of expressing herself, but without being aggressive. She knew how to communicate her thoughts and seemed to have her goals well defined. At that moment, everything about her gave me a sense of stability. She was not impulsive or messy. On the contrary, she gave the impression of being someone organized with a clear direction. During the trip, we got closer and closer. We spent practically all our time together, sharing meals, excursions, and long conversations. We talked about our families, past relationships, and what we expected from the future. And to be honest, I didn't see any red flags. When we returned to Chicago, the most natural thing was to stay in touch. The transition was smooth and effortless. We went from being two people who met on a trip to seeing each other regularly, taking the L train to meet up for dinner or walking along Lake Michigan on weekends. In a few months, we were officially a couple. From the beginning, the relationship moved fast, not in a conflicting way, but because of the speed at which everything happened. Several people around me warned me about it. My sister would say, "You are going too fast. You should get to know her better. Don't rush into it." I listened to those comments, but I didn't give them too much weight. From my point of view, I wasn't acting on impulse, but being practical. I am not someone who enjoys wasting time in ambiguous relationships. If I saw potential, I preferred to move forward. And with Madeline, I clearly saw it. She was attentive and thoughtful at key moments. She would bring me dinner at the hospital on my late nights and, at least in appearance, understood the demands of my job. She never made a fuss about my schedule, nor did she ask for more than I could give at the time. To me, that had enormous value. Little by little, without realizing it, I started building an idea in my head, a kind of internal narrative where she fit perfectly as a long-term partner, someone I could build something serious with. At 6 months, I had already thought about the possibility of marrying her. At 8, I was convinced. I know that, said like that, it sounds rushed, and it probably was. But when you are in the middle of the situation, everything seems to make sense. Every gesture, every detail is interpreted as a confirmation that you are taking the right path. Furthermore, there was another factor that heavily influenced me, my environment. Many of my colleagues in the residency program have unstable relationships or are simply single. This job consumes so much time that building something solid is not easy. That is why seeing a relationship that worked, that moved forward without constant conflicts, felt like an opportunity one shouldn't pass up. So I made a decision. I was going to propose to her. It wasn't impulsive. I planned it carefully. I wanted it to be special, to really have meaning. I invested a significant amount of money in the ring, not for appearances, but because I wanted it to represent something serious. Real commitment. I also chose the location with intention. I decided to invite her to spend a weekend in Paris. It wasn't just any trip, at least not to me. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I looked for a quiet place, away from the noise, where we could talk without interruptions. I wanted the atmosphere to help everything flow naturally. By then we had been together for 11 months. 11 months. Said out loud, it might seem like a short time, I know, but at that moment it was enough for me. The trip was practically as I had imagined it. We walked a lot, visited several places, and shared quality time. Madeline looked happy, and so was I. There was no tension. Everything felt balanced. On the last day, I decided it was time. I had already chosen the place, a quiet bench in the Jardin du Luxembourg, uncrowded, without a spectacle. I didn't want a public scene. I preferred something intimate, more authentic. I remember that moment very clearly. Interestingly, I wasn't nervous, as one might expect. Rather, I felt a kind of certainty, as if the decision had already been made beforehand. I asked her to sit down and told her I wanted to talk. I took out the ring and explained how I felt without exaggerations. I am not one for long or dramatic speeches, so I was direct. I told her I saw her as my life partner, that I wanted to build something stable by her side, that despite the time together, I felt she was the right person. There were a few seconds of silence. Then she smiled and said yes. In that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. I felt I had made the right decision, that the whole journey up to that point made sense. But I absolutely did not expect what came next. Madeline, still holding the ring, did something that left me baffled. She pulled a folded piece of paper out of her purse. At first, I thought it was a symbolic gesture, maybe a letter or something emotional to complement the moment, but it wasn't that. She unfolded it completely calmly, held it in front of her, and with a completely serious tone said, "Before we continue, I need you to read this." I frowned in confusion. I didn't understand what was happening. "What is that?" I asked her. "These are some ground rules," she replied. "For the marriage." The way she said it was not a joke at all. There was no irony or lightness. She was being completely literal. I thought maybe it was some kind of game, something symbolic or even funny, but she handed me the paper, and as soon as I started reading, I understood there was nothing symbolic about it. It was a list, 10 perfectly numbered points. The first one said, "You must always prioritize your wife above everything and everyone else." I stayed silent for a few seconds. Not because the idea itself was completely strange. I know there are people who think like that, but because of the way it was stated. It didn't sound like something built between two people. It sounded more like an order. I kept reading. "All income will be pooled into a joint account that I will manage. All your pre-existing assets will become joint marital property." At that point, the discomfort was more evident. It wasn't a conversation about how to manage finances as a couple, but a unilateral declaration with no room for discussion. I moved on to the next point. "You will cover all of your wife's personal care and beauty expenses, as you are the ultimate beneficiary." At that moment, I looked up for a second. Madeline was staring at me, as if expecting some kind of reaction, but I didn't say anything. I preferred to keep reading. "You will be permitted to see your friends twice a year, for 6 hours each time. I will approve the dates." That point was no longer just uncomfortable. It was downright absurd. It had nothing to do with the person I thought I knew, nor with the dynamic we had up to that point. And yet, the list didn't end there. The next point was the one that completely shattered any attempt I could make to justify the previous ones. "You will need to resign from your current hospital position due to the high number of female staff. You must find a position in an environment with minimal female colleagues." I had to stop there. Not because I didn't understand what it said, but because I needed to process it. I am a doctor. I work in a hospital with nurses, female doctors, and administrative staff. It is a diverse team. Thinking about eliminating that is not only unrealistic, it is simply impossible. I looked at her again, but this time not with curiosity, but with a clear mix of disbelief and alarm. "Are you serious?" I asked. Madeline nodded without hesitation. "Of course, they are basic conditions." Conditions. That word stuck with me. She wasn't talking about agreements or shared decisions. She was talking about conditions, and I hadn't even finished reading the list. There were still 5 points left, and based on how the first ones went, I already figured things weren't going to improve. "This is not realistic," I finally said, pointing to the part about leaving my job. "I can't just change my whole environment like that. My residency match is set. It doesn't work that way." She didn't seem surprised. In fact, her expression was calm, as if she already expected that reaction. "Yes, you can," she answered quite naturally. "There are hospitals where that kind of environment doesn't exist." "What do you mean by that kind of environment?" I asked, although deep down I already knew where she was going. Places where there aren't so many women, she said. For example, a military hospital. A small laugh escaped me, more out of disbelief than anything else. To work in a military hospital, I would have to be a military doctor, I explained. That means joining the armed forces, going through a completely different training process. It's not something you decide overnight. Her expression didn't change. Then you'd have to do that. That phrase carried a different weight. It wasn't a suggestion or something to consider together. It was once again an imposition disguised as a solution. Are you listening to yourself? I said, now more firmly. You are asking me to throw away my entire career path after years of hard work just to accommodate an insecurity of yours. It's not an insecurity, she replied. It is a way to avoid problems in the future. What problems? I insisted. Infidelity, temptations, she answered as if it were obvious. It's better to be safe. I shook my head slowly. You can't build a marriage by isolating yourself from the world, I told her. That is not preventing, that is controlling. She didn't react to that word. She just crossed her arms as if waiting for me to finish. I looked at the paper again. I was no longer reading it with the same attitude as the beginning. Before there was curiosity, now what I felt was tension. I decided to continue. Point 6 said, you are to cease communication with all female relatives. You may speak with your mother, but only with my supervision. I didn't even finish reading it in silence. I looked up immediately. This is getting absurd, I said bluntly. What do you mean stop talking to all the women in my family? Madeline remained completely calm. It's to avoid unnecessary conflicts, she replied. Families often interfere in marriages. It is one thing to set boundaries, I answered, and a very different one to cut off communication. You are telling me I wouldn't be able to talk to my cousins or my aunts. Exactly, she interrupted me. Only your mother, and preferably when I am present. That makes no sense, I said, now visibly upset. You are trying to isolate me. It's not isolating, she replied. It's protecting the relationship. You don't protect a relationship by destroying everything else, I responded. That is not healthy. She let out a sigh as if the problem was that I wasn't understanding something obvious. Look, if you do things right, there shouldn't be a problem, she said. It's a matter of organization. There was that word again, organization, as if reducing someone's life was simply a logistical issue. I looked down again. It was no longer just discomfort. It was starting to turn into anger. I kept reading, but then she added something else. Educate yourself, honey. There are studies that show 20% of men feel an attraction toward a family member, especially aunts or cousins. They are just waiting for the right moment, and honestly, your cousins seem quite friendly. I stared at her in complete disbelief. That is ridiculous, I told her. Do you really think I am attracted to my cousins? I prefer not to find out, she replied unfazed. Why does this point bother you so much? Do you actually have feelings for one of them? Are you serious? I told her directly. Instead of getting upset, she simply smiled. Keep going with the next point. Intimacy will be granted when I decide you have earned it. Any violation of these rules will result in a suspension of intimacy, lasting from 1 week to 1 month, depending on the severity of the infraction. I let out a sharp breath, unable to help it. Excuse me, I said, staring at her. When I have earned it. Madeline was still completely calm. Yes, she answered. It is a way to maintain balance in the relationship. No, I replied immediately. That is using intimacy as a reward and punishment system. That is not balance. It is manipulation. She frowned slightly, as if disagreeing with my interpretation. Don't see it that way, she said. It's a way to motivate you to comply with what we agreed upon. We are not agreeing on anything, I told her, raising my voice a bit. You wrote all this on your own, and now you expect me to simply accept it. Because these are logical requests, she insisted as if it were obvious. No, they are not, I replied firmly. A relationship doesn't work like a point system where you gain or lose access to something so important. She shrugged, downplaying the issue. Many couples work like this, they just don't say it out loud. Just because others do it doesn't mean it's right, I answered. The atmosphere had nothing to do with what it was a few minutes ago. What should have been an important, intimate moment had transformed into a tense, almost cold conversation. And still, the list was not over. At that point, honestly, I no longer expected to find anything reasonable. I kept reading. Point 8 said, you will not be jealous. If your wife goes out with female or male friends, you will not question it. She can go out once a week. I read that part twice, making sure I hadn't misunderstood. This is contradictory, I said. On one hand, you are asking me to limit any interaction with women, even with my own family. But you can go out with whoever you want without me saying anything. It's not the same, she replied immediately. Why not? I asked. Because I know how to handle myself, she said with total confidence. That answer made me let out a laugh, not out of amusement, but disbelief. And I don't. I asked her. It's not about that, she answered. It's different. No, it's not different, I retorted. It's a double standard. She shook her head, as if I were oversimplifying things. Men and women do not work the same way, she argued. That's why it's better to set clear rules from the beginning. Rules that only apply to me, I replied. That's not true, she said. I am also giving up things. Like what? Which ones? I asked. She hesitated for a second, but didn't answer. That silence said more than any explanation. I looked back at the paper. There were only 2 points left. By that time, I was no longer confused. Now I understood perfectly what was going on. Even so, I needed to finish reading. Point 9 said, should you choose to initiate a divorce, you will agree to a settlement in which I receive 100% of all marital assets and all of your personal, premarital assets as compensation. This time I didn't pause to process it. This is ridiculous, I said unfiltered. No one in their right mind would sign a prenup like this. Madeline, as before, didn't get upset. It's a guarantee, she replied. A guarantee of what? I asked her. That you won't make decisions lightly. No, I retorted. This is a way to trap me. You are setting an absurd penalty to prevent me from leaving the relationship. If you do things right, you wouldn't have any reason to want to leave, she answered. That is not the point, I told her. Any relationship must be able to end without one person being financially destroyed by a unilateral decision. It is a form of commitment, she insisted. No, I corrected. It is extreme control. My tone had completely changed by now, and although she noticed it, she didn't back down an inch. The last point remained. I read it in silence. Your wife is entitled to 1 night of freedom per year. I looked up slowly. Explain this to me. I told her with a calmness that contrasted with everything before. Madeline answered without hesitation. It's just 1 night. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It serves to keep the excitement alive, to avoid monotony. Are you saying you could do whatever you wanted that night? I asked. Within reason, she replied. And me? I asked her. No, she answered quite naturally. You don't need it. After that, there was a long silence. Not because there was a lack of words, but because for the first time since it all began, there was nothing left to discuss. The paper was still in my hands. 10 rules, 10 conditions, 10 different ways to turn a relationship into something completely unbalanced. I looked at the ring on her finger. It was still shining just like before, but its meaning had entirely changed. It no longer represented commitment. It represented a mistake. Without saying a word, I reached my hand out to her. Madeline frowned in confusion. What are you doing? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I took her hand firmly, without being rough, and carefully took the ring off. It was a simple gesture, but the effect was immediate. What are you doing? She repeated, now with more tension in her voice. I looked right at her. This was a mistake. The phrase seemed to completely throw her off. What? She said almost automatically. But I already said yes. This was what you wanted, right? I shook my head without looking away. No, this was not what I wanted. Her expression changed quickly. From confusion, she moved to a kind of contained desperation. Babe, why are you taking it away? She said, getting a bit closer. I don't understand. You just asked me to marry you. Yes, I replied, and I didn't know who I was proposing to. That made her take a step back. How can you say that? She asked. I am the same person. No, I told her. The person I knew wouldn't have given me a list of conditions as if this were a one-sided contract. She shook her head, visibly upset. You don't understand, she insisted. I just wanted to secure our future. Secure it how? I asked. By controlling every aspect of my life. It's not control, she answered quickly. It's organization, stability, avoiding problems before they appear. I let out a short exhale. You can't call this stability, I told her. This is imposition. It is manipulation. She took another step toward me. I knew you weren't going to accept the rules easily, she admitted. That's why I waited. That sentence made me tense up immediately. Waited for what? I asked, though I already sensed the answer. For you to commit, she said. I thought that with the ring, you would accept it out of love. There was another brief silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because she had just confirmed exactly what I feared. So you planned this, I said, more as a statement than a question. I thought about it, she replied, trying to soften it. It's not the same thing. Yes, it is, I answered. You hid this from me on purpose. Because I knew you were going to react like this, she said. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. Yes, it does mean exactly that, I replied firmly. It means you knew yourself that this wasn't reasonable. She stayed silent for a moment, as if looking for another way to justify it. I did it for us, she finally said. Because I want this to work, she added. This is not making it work, I replied. It is building something where only you decide everything. Her look changed again. It was no longer just insistence. Now her frustration was clearly visible. And what about what I want? She asked. Doesn't that matter? Of course it matters, I told her. But it cannot be above my freedom, my work, my family, my whole life. Then she dropped the question without hesitation. So you don't love me? It hung in the air. I didn't answer right away. I looked at her in silence for a few seconds, organizing what I was going to say. No, I finally said. I don't love this. Her eyes widened in surprise. You can't say that, she insisted. After all this time. All this time, I interrupted. I thought I was with someone else. Her expression hardened. You are overreacting, she said. They are just rules. I shook my head. They are not just rules, I clarified. It's a way of thinking, and I am not going to accept that. The atmosphere had absolutely nothing to do with what it had been at the beginning. There was no trace of the proposal, nor the trip, nor the hope that had brought us to that moment. We were just two people facing each other, completely disconnected. I took a step back. I am going back to the hotel, I said. She reacted immediately. What? You can't just leave like this. Yes, I can, I replied without hesitation. No, she insisted. You can't leave me here after this. Exactly after this is when it makes the most sense for me to leave, I told her. You are being unfair, she added. You are not even trying. Trying what? I asked. To accept conditions that make a healthy relationship impossible. She pressed her lips together, as if holding back. We could adjust them, she proposed. Negotiate. I slowly shook my head. This isn't something that can be negotiated, I told her. It's not a minor detail, it's everything. So, you are throwing everything away? She responded, raising her voice. No, I answered calmly. I am avoiding getting into something that clearly isn't going to work. There was a short silence. You can't leave me like this, she repeated, this time in a lower voice. We are in another country. You are an adult, I told her. You know how to handle yourself. It's not about that, she replied. It's about this. Us. I looked at her one last time. There was no doubt anymore. Only a mix of clarity and disappointment. There is no us. This is where it ends. I didn't wait for her answer. I turned around and started walking. I didn't look back. With each step, I felt something different, lighter, as if I were taking off a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. The walk back to the hotel was completely silent. I didn't need to overthink. Everything was clear. Upon arriving, I sat on the bed almost out of inertia. I took the ring out of my pocket and stared at it for a few seconds. I didn't feel sadness. I felt relief, because although everything that had just happened was uncomfortable, even unpleasant, it was also necessary. Sometimes something that seems right just needs a little bit of truth to completely fall apart. And this time, that truth arrived right on time, before it was too late. Comment. True love should always feel like a safe harbor rather than a cage. When we invite someone into our lives, we must never trade our core values or our freedom for the illusion of stability. Healthy partnerships are built on mutual trust and shared respect, not rigid rules and hidden agendas. Walking away from a situation that demands that you shrink yourself is an act of profound self-respect. It takes immense courage to choose your own peace over a relationship that feels fundamentally unbalanced. Letting go of what does not serve you is the first step toward genuine healing and personal growth. You have a responsibility to protect your joy and the meaningful connections that matter most to you. I hope you always remember to set firm boundaries and honor your own worth in every area of your life. Please continue to treat yourselves with kindness and never settle for anything less than a partnership that truly uplifts you. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.